September 1944. A single message arrives at a military tent in France. The words on that paper will wound a proud general deeper than any enemy bullet ever could. What he says next, in private rooms, angry letters, and bitter interviews for the next 30 years, will reveal how pride, competence, and politics collided in the final year of World War II. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. September 1st, 1944. Northern France. The air smells of diesel fuel and wet grass. Inside a military tent that serves as Field Marshal Montgomery's headquarters, maps cover every surface. Officers move quietly, updating positions, reading reports, drinking tea that has gone cold. Montgomery stands with his hands behind his back. He wears his famous black beret and his uniform is perfectly pressed. Everything about him is precise, controlled, exact. His staff knows this look. It means he is thinking, planning, controlling the war in his mind. Then a young soldier enters carrying a single piece of paper. A coded message from high command. The room doesn't go silent, but everyone stops moving. The soldier gives it to Montgomery's chief of staff, who reads it quickly, then walks to Montgomery. Montgomery takes the paper. His eyes scan the words. For just a moment, something flashes across his face. Shock, anger, hurt. Then it is gone, replaced by his usual mask of control. The message is simple but devastating. General Dwight Eisenhower will now take direct command of all ground forces. Montgomery, who has commanded the land battle since D-Day, will now only command his own British and Canadian forces. He has been demoted in everything but name. He reads it again, slower this time. Then he folds the paper with sharp, precise movements and places it on the map table. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice tight and controlled. "The Americans have made their decision." What Montgomery said in those first hours was not shouted. It came out in quiet statements to his closest officers, words that would be remembered and repeated for decades. To his chief of staff, Major General de Guingand, he said, "This is not satisfactory, Freddie. Not satisfactory at all. The word choice tells you everything." Montgomery always chose his words carefully. Not satisfactory means there is a problem with the system, with the method, with how the war is being run. Later that evening, alone in his personal caravan, an officer bringing him tea heard him talking to himself. "I commanded from Normandy to here. I had control of it. And now they take it away when we are about to end this war." The word, control, appears again and again when Montgomery talks about war. For him, war must be controlled, gripped firmly, directed with precision. The idea that this control could be taken from him, not by the enemy but by his own allies, is almost physically painful. September 10th. 10 days later, Montgomery travels to Brussels to meet Eisenhower face to face. The city is celebrating liberation. Flags hang from windows. People crowd the streets cheering. Church bells ring. But inside the military building where Allied commanders meet, the mood is tense. Montgomery arrives early. He always does. His maps are already laid out. His arguments are ready in his mind like weapons prepared for battle. When Eisenhower enters, smiling, friendly, relaxed, Montgomery gets straight to business. "General," he begins. "We must talk about the situation." Eisenhower sits down casually. "Of course, Monty. That's why we're here." Montgomery lays out his case like a lawyer in court. Commanding land operations is a full-time job. It requires a commander who is forward with the troops, who knows the battle situation moment by moment, who can make quick decisions. You already carry the burden of supreme command, the politics, the strategy, the management of the whole alliance. To try to do both jobs is too much. It sounds reasonable. Professional. But underneath is a personal complaint that Montgomery cannot quite hide. He continues. "In Normandy, I did this job. I commanded the ground battle while you handled the bigger issues. It worked. The proof is that we are standing in liberated Brussels right now. Eisenhower listens patiently. He has heard this argument before and will hear it again. When he responds, his voice stays calm. Bernard, the situation has changed. We now have armies from the English Channel to Switzerland. American forces outnumber British forces significantly. General Bradley commands his army group well. General Patton is advancing. The French are fighting. This is not a single battle anymore. It requires coordination at the highest level. Then give me proper authority, Montgomery says, his voice getting sharper. If I am to command the main attack in the north, I must have the power to direct it properly, to control resources, to ensure the decisive blow is not weakened. This is Montgomery's core belief: concentrate all power in one place, strike hard, end the war quickly. But it is also about something else, about a man who believes his record of victories gives him the right to command. Eisenhower's response is the same one he will give many times. The command structure must serve the alliance. I cannot give one commander from one nation authority over all forces. The Americans would not accept a British field marshal commanding all American armies. We must maintain unity above everything else. Montgomery's jaw tightens. His fingers tap once on the table. Then understand this, he says, each word precise. I will command my own forces with the authority you give me. But I cannot take responsibility for the overall land battle without the power to direct it. If you insist on commanding ground operations while also being supreme commander, then you bear the responsibility for whatever happens. It is a careful statement, designed to be quoted, designed to establish his position for history. Montgomery is already thinking about how this will be written down, how it will be remembered. As the meeting ends, Montgomery gathers his papers with movements that are too precise, too controlled. To one of his officers, he says something that will be whispered throughout British headquarters. I have been reduced from commanding the battle to being merely an army group commander. The word merely says everything. For Montgomery, who defeated Rommel in Africa, who planned D-Day, who drove the Germans across France, to be merely anything is unbearable. The days following September 1st are strange for Montgomery's headquarters. Outwardly, everything continues as normal. Orders are issued. Reports are filed. The front keeps moving. But something fundamental has changed, like a building that looks the same but now rests on a cracked foundation. Montgomery's staff notices it first in small ways. The field marshal spends longer periods staring at maps without speaking. He questions decisions that would normally be automatic. He asks for updates on what American forces are doing, not because he commands them anymore, but because he is trying to understand a battle he no longer controls. One morning, a young intelligence officer brings a report about Patton's Third Army advancing in the south. Montgomery reads it carefully, then says something that surprises everyone in the room. Patton is wasting fuel and ammunition on objectives that do not matter. If I still had authority over the American armies, would halt his advance and redirect those resources to the north. But I do not have that authority anymore. The bitterness in his voice is unmistakable. De Gingand, always trying to smooth tensions, suggests that Montgomery could recommend this course of action to Eisenhower. Montgomery looks at him with tired eyes. Recommend, he says. I do not wish to recommend. A commander does not recommend. A commander commands. That is the difference between authority and advice, and I have been reduced from one to the other. During this period, Montgomery also becomes obsessed with documentation. He orders his staff to keep detailed records of every decision, every communication, every development. When asked why such detailed records are necessary, Montgomery responds. Because when this war is over and the official histories are written, the Americans will have their version and we will have ours. I want the facts preserved so that future generations can judge who was right. It is a revealing statement. Montgomery is not just fighting the current war anymore. He is preparing for the historical war that will be fought in books and memoirs for decades to come. Montgomery is not a man who leaves things to chance or to unclear conversations. He begins writing letters to Eisenhower, long, detailed letters that lay out his arguments like drops of water wearing away stone. October 10, 1944. In his caravan by lamplight, Montgomery writes what he believes is perfect logic. The letter runs several pages. The key part reads: I respectfully submit that commanding land operations requires a commander who is completely devoted to that task. The Supreme Commander already carries tremendous burdens of political coordination and strategic planning. To add operational direction of the land battle risks dividing attention at the exact moment when concentration is most needed. My experience from North Africa through Normandy has demonstrated my capacity to direct large operations to successful conclusion. The message is clear but unstated: I can do this job. I have proven I can do this job. I should be doing this job. When Eisenhower's reply arrives, Montgomery reads it standing up. Eisenhower thanks Montgomery for his thoughts, acknowledges his experience, and then politely but firmly says the current command structure will not change. To de Gingand, Montgomery says, they are determined to run this war by committee. Political sensitivity will come before military efficiency. The word sensitivity is spoken with contempt. In Montgomery's mind, war should be decided by competence and results, not by managing egos. In his diary during this period, Montgomery writes something unusually personal. I find myself in an impossible position. I am expected to win battles but not given the authority to direct the overall campaign. It is like asking a surgeon to perform an operation while someone else controls which instruments he may use. The responsibility remains, but the power to execute has been removed. This is not how wars are won. As autumn turns to winter, Montgomery's frustration grows. Every day brings new evidence, in his mind, that dispersed command leads to dispersed results. Supply problems worsen. The port of Antwerp has been captured but cannot be used because the approaches are still held by Germans. Montgomery argues this should be the absolute priority. But resources are being spread across multiple offensives: Bradley's forces in the center, Patton's in the south, Montgomery's in the north. At a staff meeting in mid-November, Montgomery explodes in a rare show of public anger. We have captured the greatest port in Europe and we cannot use it because we lack the concentrated force to clear the approaches. Why? Because resources are being scattered across a broad front instead of being massed for decisive action. This is exactly what I warned against. This is exactly what happens when operational direction is divided. His officers sit in uncomfortable silence. They know he is right about Antwerp. They also know that complaining about the command structure will not change it. Later that same day, Montgomery receives a message from Eisenhower essentially telling him to focus on his own sector and leave overall strategy to Supreme Headquarters. Montgomery reads it, crumples it slightly, a rare loss of composure, then smooths it out again and files it carefully. To de Gingand, he says, I am being told to mind my own business. As if winning this war efficiently is not everyone's business. In late November, Prime Minister Winston Churchill visits Montgomery's headquarters. Churchill has his own frustrations with the Americans and is sympathetic to Montgomery's complaints. But he is also a political realist who understands the bigger picture. Over dinner, Montgomery lays out his case to Churchill with the same precision he uses for military operations. He explains why concentrated command is essential. He argues that Eisenhower is trying to do too much. He insists that the war could be over by Christmas if proper operational methods were applied. Churchill listens, smoking his cigar, saying little. When Montgomery finishes, Churchill responds in a way that surprises the field marshal. Bernard, you are probably right about the military logic. You usually are. But wars are not won by military logic alone. They are won by holding alliances together. The Americans have more men, more equipment, more resources than we do. We need them more than they need us. If we push too hard on the command question, we risk fracturing the alliance. And a fractured alliance guarantees we lose, no matter how brilliant the operational plan. Montgomery tries to argue, but Churchill cuts him off gently. I am not asking you to like it. I am asking you to accept it. Fight your battles, win your victories, and let Eisenhower manage the politics. That is the arrangement we must live with. After Churchill leaves, Montgomery sits alone in his caravan for a long time. One officer who saw him that evening said later, "It was the only time I ever saw the field marshal look truly defeated. Not by the Germans, but by political reality." Then everything changes again. December 16, 1944. The Germans launch a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest. American forces are caught off guard. The attack threatens to split the Allied front in two. Communications break down. Command chains are disrupted. In the chaos, Eisenhower makes a decision he has resisted for months. He temporarily puts the American 1st and 9th Armies under Montgomery's command. When the order reaches Montgomery's headquarters, several officers see something like satisfaction cross his face. Not joy at American difficulties, but confirmation that his arguments were correct. To his staff, he says, "Now they come to me. When the crisis arrives, when firm command is needed, they come to me." It is a statement that will haunt him later when American commanders hear about it. But in the moment, Montgomery believes it is simply truth. Montgomery takes control with his usual precise methods. He stabilizes the northern part of the battle. He organizes defenses. He prepares counterattacks. American officers working under him have mixed feelings, some respect his skill, others resent taking orders from a British commander. During the crisis, Montgomery also does something that shows both his competence and his inability to read political situations. He visits American headquarters personally to assess the situation. American officers later report that he arrived like a headmaster visiting a poorly performing school, confident, slightly condescending, ready to fix their problems. To one American general, Montgomery says, "You have had a bit of a bloody nose. That happens in war. The important thing now is to organize properly and hit back methodically." The American general, whose men have been fighting desperately for days, does not appreciate being told he has had a bit of a bloody nose. But Montgomery, focused entirely on military efficiency, does not notice the offense he is causing. But it is what Montgomery says during and after the battle that creates real problems. Montgomery holds a press conference on January 7, 1945. The room is full of reporters from Britain, America, and Canada. Men with notebooks ready, looking for a story. Montgomery, wearing his beret and uniform, describes the battle in what he thinks is appropriate modesty. But American ears hear something very different. The key passage that reporters write down. "As soon as I saw what was happening, I took certain steps to ensure that if the Germans reached the Meuse River, they would not cross it. I carried out certain movements to provide balanced positions to meet the danger. I was thinking ahead." He continues, "The battle has been most interesting. Possibly one of the most interesting and tricky battles I have ever handled. The word 'I' appears again and again. I took steps. I carried out movements. I was thinking ahead. Battles I have handled." To British ears, this sounds like normal command reporting. To American ears, especially to Bradley and Patton, it sounds like Montgomery claiming personal credit for saving American forces. Later, a reporter asks about American soldier performance. Montgomery, trying to be generous, says, "The American soldier is brave, steady under fire, and shows great determination. I have great admiration for the American GI. It is meant as a compliment. But the phrase, 'I have great admiration,' sounds like a superior judging subordinates, not an ally praising equals." When reports of the press conference reach American commanders, they explode with anger. Bradley is furious. Patton says things about Montgomery that cannot be printed. Even Eisenhower, usually so controlled, is deeply frustrated. The press conference threatens the unity he has worked so hard to maintain. But it is in private, away from press conferences and official letters, that Montgomery reveals his true feelings. To British generals, to visiting politicians, to his personal staff, Montgomery expresses bitterness that never appears in official records but is remembered by those who heard it. One officer later recalled, "The field marshal would sometimes speak as if a great injustice had been done. Not to him personally, he would say, but to winning the war efficiently. But you could tell it was deeply personal." Montgomery's theme is always the same, competence versus politics. He frames it this way. "I commanded the land battle successfully from Normandy until September. The proof is results, we drove the Germans across France. Then political considerations required that command be taken from me. The result was scattered effort, loss of focus, and the war took longer than necessary." To Lord Alanbrooke, Britain's top military officer and Montgomery's closest friend, Montgomery writes in a letter. "Eisenhower is a very nice man, but he is not a soldier. He has no combat experience. He has never commanded anything in battle. Now he proposes to command the land battle while also being supreme commander, and the result will be that no one truly commands at all. The phrase, 'nice man, no soldier,' becomes infamous. It sums up everything Montgomery feels. Eisenhower is politically smart, personally likable, diplomatically skilled, but these are the qualities of a coordinator, not a warrior." In another letter to a British general, Montgomery is even more direct. "In battle, I am better than he is. At staff work, he is probably better than me. The problem is we are in a battle, not a staff meeting, and they have put the staff officer in charge of the fighting." It is devastating, all the more cutting because Montgomery delivers it calmly, as if stating a simple fact. To de Gingand, during a frustrating moment, Montgomery says something that shows his view of all American commanders. "Bradley is solid, nothing brilliant but reliable. Patton is all dash and publicity, more concerned with headlines than proper tactics. And Eisenhower wants everyone to be happy. He runs the war like a man organizing a dinner party where all the guests have different tastes." The dinner party comparison is vintage Montgomery, precise, cutting, designed to make Eisenhower's coalition management sound trivial. At a private dinner in early 1945 with British officers, after several glasses of wine, Montgomery speaks with unusual honesty. "They gave me the job when it was hard. Normandy, the breakout, the advance across France, that was me. I planned it, I commanded it, I made it work. Then, when victory was close, when the decisive moment arrived, they took it away and gave it to a man who has never heard a shot fired in anger. Why? Because the Americans have more divisions, because politics matters more than competence. Because keeping everyone's feelings safe is more important than winning efficiently." One officer asks if Montgomery thinks Eisenhower understands military operations at all. Montgomery's response is measured but brutal. He understands them the way a man who has read about swimming understands swimming. He knows the theory. He can describe the strokes. But he has never been in the water. As the war enters its final months, Montgomery throws himself into planning the Rhine River crossing with intense focus. The operation will be massive, the largest river assault since D-Day. To his staff during planning, he makes a statement that reveals his mindset: this operation will be conducted with such preparation, such thoroughness, such overwhelming force that success will be certain. Some believe in improvisation. I believe in preparation. It is a dig at Patton, who crossed the Rhine earlier with less planning. It is also Montgomery saying his methodical approach should have been directing the entire Allied effort. When the Rhine crossing succeeds brilliantly, Montgomery allows himself satisfaction. To de Gingand, he says, "A properly planned operation, properly supplied, properly commanded. This is how wars are won." The implication hangs in the air: this is how the whole campaign could have been run if I had been allowed to direct it. Lüneburg Heath, northern Germany. A flat landscape under grey skies. Montgomery's headquarters is set up in tents and vehicles, arranged with geometric precision. At 6:30 p.m., German officers arrive to surrender. They are led to a simple tent with a table covered by a brown blanket. No flags, no ceremony. Admiral von Friedberg leads the German group. His face is gray with exhaustion and defeat. With him are other senior German officers. They wear their uniforms correctly, but something essential has gone out of them. Montgomery enters wearing his battle dress and black beret. He does not shake hands. He does not offer sympathy. He looks at them with cold, hard eyes and speaks with absolute authority. I am prepared to accept the unconditional surrender of all German forces in Holland, Northwest Germany, and Denmark. The Germans sit. Papers are produced. Montgomery remains standing, looking down at them. Cameras film the scene. Photographers capture the moment. Von Friedberg's hand shakes as he signs. The scratch of pen on paper is loud in the silence. When it is done, Montgomery collects the documents with precise movements. That concludes the matter, he says. The Germans are led out. The tent empties. And then, alone for a moment, Montgomery stands at the table looking down at the surrender documents. One officer later described his expression as, the look of a man who won the game but lost something bigger. Because even in this moment of complete military triumph, Montgomery cannot forget what he has lost. He is accepting surrenders as commander of the 21st Army Group. Not as the ground force commander. Not as the man who directed Allied victory from Normandy to Germany. As an Army Group commander, merely. Later that evening, in his caravan, with de Gingand and a few trusted officers, someone mentions that Eisenhower will receive the overall German surrender. Montgomery's response is quiet, almost thoughtful, of course he will. That is the logic of the command structure they created. The Supreme Commander commands supremely, and those of us who actually fought the battles become footnotes in his story. It is not said with anger. The lack of emotion makes it more devastating. Montgomery has moved past anger into something colder, a permanent resentment that will shape everything he says about the war for the rest of his life. The war ends on May 8, 1945. The guns stop. The armies begin going home. Politicians and historians begin writing the official story. And Montgomery begins his own campaign, not military, but historical. In June 1945, at a dinner with British journalists, Montgomery speaks frankly. History will have to judge whether our command arrangements were the best possible. I have my views. I believe operational command of land forces should have remained with a dedicated ground commander. The division of authority that happened in September 1944 was, in my professional judgment, wrong. It made the war last longer. One journalist asks if he means to criticize Eisenhower directly. Montgomery's answer is careful. General Eisenhower is a fine man and a skilled diplomat. But diplomacy and operational command are different skills. We needed a warrior. We got a peace conference chairman. When Montgomery publishes his memoirs in 1958, the sections about Eisenhower and command are the most closely read and hotly debated. Montgomery writes with his usual precision. From D-Day until September 1, 1944, I was responsible for detailed conduct of the land battle. During this period, we achieved decisive success. On September 1, this responsibility was removed and assumed by the Supreme Commander, who already carried enormous burdens of overall strategic direction and political coordination. In my view, no one man could do both jobs effectively. The result was loss of operational clarity and scattered effort that allowed the Germans to recover and made the campaign longer than necessary. He continues, I had proven my capacity to direct large operations from North Africa through Normandy. I believed then, and believe now, that concentrated command and concentrated force could have ended the European war in 1944. We had the enemy beaten. We failed to deliver the final blow because we lacked unified operational direction. American reviewers attack the memoir. They accuse Montgomery of rewriting history to put himself at the center of Allied victory. They defend Eisenhower's strategy and coalition management. They point out Montgomery's failures and argue his single-thrust idea would have led to disaster. British reviewers are more sympathetic but also uncomfortable. They recognize Montgomery is fighting old battles in print, that his inability to let go makes him look petty. But Montgomery does not stop. In interviews, in speeches, in private conversations that somehow always become public, he returns again and again to the same message: he was the better operational commander, he was denied his rightful authority, the war could have been won faster under his direction. In 1965, a television interviewer asks Field Marshal Montgomery, now an old man in his late 70s, to reflect on his relationship with Eisenhower. Montgomery sits in his study surrounded by maps and photographs from the war. His voice still has authority, but there is weariness in his eyes. Eisenhower was a great man, Montgomery begins. He held together an alliance that could easily have broken apart. He managed enormous political pressures. He maintained unity among forces that might have fallen to arguing. These are considerable achievements. The interviewer waits. But, Montgomery says, and the word hangs in the air, he was not a battle commander. He never commanded troops in combat before becoming supreme commander. He understood staff work, logistics, coordination, the administrative parts of war. But the art of operational command, the instinct for the decisive moment, the ability to concentrate force and strike the killing blow, these require experience he did not have. Do you believe you should have kept ground force command? The interviewer asks. Montgomery's answer is immediate: I believe operational command should have been given to someone whose entire professional life prepared him for exactly that responsibility. Whether that was me or another dedicated ground commander is less important than the principle. Then, in a moment of vulnerability, he adds, of course it should have been me. I had earned it. North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, the advance across France, I had proven myself repeatedly. To be reduced to Army Group Command when the decisive moment came was difficult to accept. The word reduced again. 30 years later, it still hurts. Montgomery dies on March 24, 1976, at age 88. Among his papers is a handwritten note from the early 1970s. It appears to be a draft for a speech never completed. The question of command in the European war was the central strategic question. Everything else flowed from how command was organized. We began with the correct arrangement, a supreme commander handling grand strategy and politics, and a ground commander directing the land battle. This worked brilliantly from June to September 1944. Then we changed to an incorrect arrangement, the supreme commander trying to do both jobs. This did not work brilliantly. It worked adequately. We won, but we won slowly, at greater cost than necessary, and with less decisiveness than was possible. I argued against this change. I was overruled. History must judge whether I was right. The note ends there. But it represents Montgomery's final word on the subject: he was right, they were wrong, and history owes him recognition of that fact. What Montgomery said after being outranked was not a single statement but a 30-year argument with history. It began with, "This is not satisfactory," in September 1944. It continued through bitter private statements like, "Nice man, no soldier," during the war. It evolved into carefully written memoir passages. And it ended with an elderly field marshal's insistence that he had been proven right. The irony is that Montgomery's statements hurt his own case. If he had accepted his demotion with grace, if he had praised Eisenhower while quietly maintaining professional disagreements, history might have been kinder. Instead, his constant campaign to prove himself right made him appear petty and unable to see beyond his wounded pride. Eisenhower, by contrast, rarely spoke badly of Montgomery publicly. When asked about their disagreements, he would say something gracious about Montgomery's abilities while gently noting the difficulties of coalition command. This restraint made Eisenhower look generous and Montgomery look obsessed. But buried in Montgomery's bitter statements is a real professional disagreement. Was the broad advance the best strategy? Should one man have tried to be both supreme commander and operational director? Could the war have been won faster with different command arrangements? These are serious military questions, hidden but not eliminated by Montgomery's inability to argue them calmly. In the end, what Montgomery said reveals less about Eisenhower's ability or Allied strategy than about Montgomery himself, a brilliant, difficult, proud man who could not accept that merit alone does not determine command, that politics and alliance unity are part of strategy, and that sometimes the best soldier does not get to direct the battle. His words echo through history not as proof he was right but as warning, that professional excellence can be destroyed by personal bitterness, that being right about tactics is not the same as being right about strategy, and that the need to be recognized as correct can become more important than actually being correct. Montgomery wanted history to remember he argued for concentration, for unified command, for decisive action. History remembers instead that he never stopped arguing, never accepted the decision, never saw beyond his conviction that he deserved better. That is the final irony of what Montgomery said after being outranked. In trying so hard to secure his place in history, he guaranteed that history would remember him not for his victories but for his complaints, not for North Africa and Normandy but for 30 years of bitter insistence that someone else should have commanded the victory he helped win. The story of what Montgomery said after being outranked is ultimately a tragedy of pride meeting politics, of professional excellence colliding with strategic reality. Montgomery was not wrong about everything. His arguments about concentrated force had military merit. His concerns about divided command were legitimate. His frustration with dispersed resources was understandable. Military historians still debate whether his single-thrust strategy might have worked, whether the war could have ended sooner under different command arrangements. But Montgomery was catastrophically wrong about one thing: he believed that being right about tactics entitled him to command. He never understood that in coalition warfare, maintaining the alliance is itself a military objective. Eisenhower's great achievement was not operational brilliance, it was keeping British, American, Canadian, French, and Polish forces working together toward a common goal despite enormous national pressures pulling them apart. Montgomery saw this as weakness. History sees it as strategic genius of a different kind. In his final years, living in a modest house in Hampshire, England, Montgomery would sometimes receive visitors who wanted to hear his war stories. He would show them his maps, his photographs, his carefully preserved documents. And almost always, the conversation would turn to the command question. "If only they had let me finish it," he would say, looking at a map of Northwest Europe with pins still marking the positions from 1944. "If only they had trusted the method that had worked from Alamein onward. We could have ended it in 44. His visitors would nod politely, knowing they were hearing an old argument that would never be resolved, a wound that would never heal. When Montgomery died in 1976, obituaries around the world praised his military achievements. They called him one of Britain's greatest field commanders. They credited him with vital victories in North Africa and Europe. But almost every obituary also mentioned his difficult personality, his conflicts with American commanders, and his bitter dispute with Eisenhower over command. The words he had spoken in anger and pride had become inseparable from his legacy. Perhaps the most telling epitaph came not from an official source but from a former staff officer who had served with Montgomery throughout the war. Asked to sum up the field marshal's career, the officer said, "He was brilliant at winning battles but terrible at winning arguments. He understood how to defeat the Germans but never understood how to work with the Americans. He could plan an operation with genius but could not accept a decision with grace." In the end, his greatest enemy was not Rommel or the Wehrmacht, it was his own inability to let go of being right. That is what Montgomery said after being outranked by Eisenhower, everything, repeatedly, for 30 years, until the words themselves became his memorial, a monument not to victory but to the bitterness of a great soldier who could never accept that greatness alone is not enough.